I'm Scott L. Miller. It is the 25th of May, 2023. This is my vlog of daily life living in Leon, Nicaragua. And today, we're going to dig into some viewer questions and just go through some things that you guys have been asking over the past month that I have been hesitant to get to because I've been busy making other videos. So we're going to get to all of that right after the bump. All right, our first question comes from Catch the Fire, Worship Flags, Elevate Your Praise. Do you have other videos about bringing a dog to Nicaragua? What kind of private jet service did you use? How did your dog adjust to Nicaragua? Well, you can see my dogs behind me attempting to adjust right now. They're kind of maniacs. So we took a private jet, first of all, out of Miami, and it's like a Learjet, right? And we booked the whole thing, and for us, we were moving down. We're a family of 4. Paul was already down here, and my wife and I and the kids and the 2 dogs all came together. So we booked an entire private chartered, basically Learjet. I think it could seat 6 or 8, but we took the whole thing, and what we did was, so the dogs were able to be loose in the cabin. They had collars on and harnesses, but they weren't tied to anything. They were loose, so they weren't panicking. They were very comfortable. And for us, we had to. Our one dog is a short-nosed breed, a Boston Terrier, so he can never be put in cargo. It's not safe. And our other dog has massive crate anxiety to the point where she would have a heart attack and never survive a flight in a crate. So that's the reason that we have her as a rescue, is because no one could keep her. She can't be alone. She can't be crated, nothing like that. So she's specifically a rescue because of her conditions with that. So neither of our dogs had any possibility of going anywhere but either in a car or in the cabin of an aircraft. And so we had to work around that. And we worked out the cost of driving and all that. And it was so much. It was like, well, why would we do that when we can just fly? And then we would be stuck with a car, which thank goodness we didn't do. That would have created so many more problems than just paying for the flight. So the flight was $16,000, which is obviously really expensive. But when you take into the cost that it was 4 people flying plus 2 dogs, and we got to bring so much luggage, we got to bring to the weight limit of the aircraft luggage, which is still not a ton, but it was way more than we would have been able to bring on another flight. And you have to remember that at the time we came down, flights to Managua essentially didn't exist. So we didn't have the Spirit, we didn't have the United, none of those things were options. So we were really in a pickle, and taking a private flight was our only realistic option and was cheaper, or about break even with driving, and certainly was the right decision. So we just simply looked for a charter service in Miami, found one that was highly rated, and it's only a 2-hour flight, which helps keep the cost down, I say, it being $16,000. Sorry, we have very bright sun today, and it's raining on me as we do this. I don't know if you can see it, but this is our first, I'm recording this on the day that we have our first full day of raining. It's been raining all night and all day, which is fantastic. I'm absolutely loving this. So how did our dogs adjust? I mean, honestly, well, and so the advantage of the plane is once we landed, we were able to take the dogs off the plane, walk them through everything. They were never in crates, never left unattended, never with anyone else, always with us. Everything was fantastic. So there's just so much safety and convenience. I know it's expensive, but really look at your total cost, and you may find that it's not as expensive as you think. Speaking of adjusting dogs, little Clive sitting on his giant chair surveying his domain is a pretty good sign of his adjustment. Hey, little boy. Hey, little boy. And Mia. They love it. So how did our dogs adjust? The answer is they adjust really well. They spent their most of the year living in a hotel on the beach, and so that meant I had to take them out and walk every morning. They could never be loose and run around, and that was not a good thing. Overall, they did okay. It wasn't terrible, and they're American dogs. And everyone will tell you here, oh, just let your dogs loose. Oh, just do this. Oh, do not listen to anybody in Nicaragua about what you should do with your dogs. If you treat your American-bred dogs, or Canadian or whatever, your non-Nicaraguan dogs, like a Nicaraguan dog, they will be dead in the first day. Every one of them, every time. No foreign dog is going to survive being loose here. The dogs that are here have a terrible life, and they die quickly, and they only live as long as they do. And it's terrible, it's heartbreaking, but many of them do survive quite some time, And it's because they have a DNA of only dogs that avoid cars have survived here. And so hundreds of generations of dogs giving birth to puppies, and only those that avoid cars grow up to have puppies, has made dogs that are actually pretty resilient to getting away from vehicles. But if your dog is not from here, they will not have that DNA background, and you will start the natural selection process with your dog. There is no reason to bring a dog here if you're going to turn them loose to die. Do not do it. Yet everyone I know, including expats who don't have dogs of their own, immediately come here and go, just stop doing the things to care about your dog like you're used to. Treat them like a Nicaraguan, and just treat it like it's a wild dog that you feed sometimes. That is, do not do that. Do not bring it. Find someone in America to take your dog if that is your plan. There's no reasonable way that is going to work. You're going to have to figure out how to deal with your pets in another country. Now, we lived on the beach. That meant I walked them every day. I was the only person on the beach walking dogs with a leash, but that's fine, not a problem. We couldn't let them run around the hotel loose because that would be weird, and there's wild dogs in the hotel all the time, and the hotel's open to the street. It would take seconds for our dog to get distracted. It would just run into traffic. So we could never let them loose. That caused a lot of problems. We'd walk them on the beach, we'd walk them on the road. So they got walks, and I do a lot of walking with them every day, but at the end, it just wasn't perfect. So we ended up moving into the city, and we had a large house. You can see my videos of the hotel, of the house that we had. We had a big courtyard. There they could run around the house, no problem. They had lots of space to run around, lots of rooms. They felt much more free there, and my dogs had some anxiety with the constant strangers and strange dogs at the hotel, because every business here is full of animals. So I still had to walk them in the city, and I would have to walk them quite frequently, but at least walking in the city, they got a lot of exercise in the house, and the walking was mostly just for their bathroom and exploration and perimeter testing kind of stuff, but it was still really exhausting. When we moved out here to the country, now we have this giant yard, and we have another yard that you can't see here. It's not as big as this one, but we have quite a large yard connected to another part of the house, and the dogs can just run and run and run, and I never have to take them out for walks. I never have to do anything special. Everything is gated. Now I am going to show, so some of these are fences meant to keep people and large animals out, but they were not going to keep my Boston Terrier in, so we took plastic mesh and put it up over spots where he could get out. So we had to do a little, but only a tiny bit of prep to make it that it's dog secure. And now, yes, dog, that got his attention. And in doing so, they have complete run of the house, which is quite large. They have a lot of space in the house and a lot of space in the yard, and they are as happy as dogs can be. They just run and play like so much, and then they come and they have this outdoor furniture, and they come out here and sleep, and they go into my bedroom and they sleep, and they come into my office and sleep at my feet, and they just play and sleep and play and sleep all day long, and they are super healthy and super happy, and you can see them just smiling every day and being they're so relieved that this is where they ended up. And they came from okay backgrounds. They're both rescues, but we rescued them both young. They weren't terribly abused. The little one he was a tiny, tiny, tiny puppy, and they just needed a home really quickly, and we were able to take him very rapidly because we worked with the rescue. And the other one had an okay life, but she had some trauma, and she just has this anxiety, and she has to be handled. But so now being here, they did live in Texas for a while with a yard, and they would just come and go and play, so they're kind of used to that. And then they lost it for a while, and now that they have it back, and it's so much better. They love the weather. They are warm, but they're short fur dogs. And they'll come out and lay in the sun, even as hot as it is. They will lay in the sun and be like, "This is our thing. We're just baking in the sun and getting solar charged." And then they'll go try to find a room with air conditioning or find a room with tile or someplace that's been wet recently. They will lay down and cool down. They'll scratch in the dirt and lay in cooler dirt and cool down, and just do it again and again and play. And they really love it, really do. So from as long as you're keeping your dogs in a safe environment, I think there's no reason for them to really have to worry about adapting to Nicaragua. It's not like people where they're going to be learning another language and getting used to different food. We're still able to get very similar dog kibbles. That's what our dogs like to eat. We've tried other things. They don't want anything else. Really, for an adaptation for them, it's really just been a much better life. And now that we found the perfect scenario for them, they're looking at complete doggy luxury for the foreseeable future. All right, next up, Christopher House says the low cost of living and not needing a car to travel throughout the country is great. Public transportation sounds wonderful. This isn't really a question, it's more of a comment, and he's right. Not needing a car here is a really big selling point, and the fact that there's great public transportation is also a great selling point. Those things, so it's nice that you have the option. And I feel like if you move to the United States or to most places, you really don't have an option. If you're going to live in a place that you want to live, chances are you need a car. It's just a fact of life. Could you survive without it? Yeah, I'm not saying that there's no way, but you're very likely to be super unhappy and be like, why am I living without a car? I can't do anything that I want. Living in Nicaragua, because public transportation is super cheap and nearly everywhere, truly nearly everywhere, it does take a learning curve. Right, you have to learn the chicken bus system, the UCA bus system, the private shuttles, the taxis, the city buses, and for each city, like there's a bit of learning curve, and you're gonna have to do them in Spanish, and every city's different, and there's no posted guidelines. Trust me, it's work. But if you're taking the time to actually learn how it works and do it, you can save so much money. And you don't have to worry about owning a car. You don't have to worry about driving. You don't have to worry about maintenance on a car or the cost of gas or any of those things. You can do things incredibly inexpensively and let someone else worry about the driving while you're in a foreign country. And you can just sit back and ride on public transportation and eat low-cost, delicious snacks that they sell you at the bus station and let them take you where you need to go and act like a local and get to know people and just have a lot of fun doing that. Now, that said, I have a car now. I lived almost 2 years here without a car, and I was very addicted to the idea of not having one. We need one for the hotel, so we have reasons to have it. We do an awful lot of stuff. We are a family of 4 and Paul, so we have 5 people. In many cases, we have more. We're constantly packing people into the car and doing treks places. And I do this show where I need to be able to bring filming equipment and go places. There's a lot of things that come together and say, yeah, having a car kind of makes sense. So for us, we now have a car, but only since we knew we were moving into the country. We didn't do it when we lived in the city. We didn't do it when we lived on the beach. Now we live in the suburbs. It's different. Now that the business is busier, it's different. Now that we're filming farther afield, it's different. We have dogs, it's different. There's a lot of factors. And the nice thing is, if you want to have a car, that's within your reach. If you want to live without a car, you can absolutely do that. And I know lots of people, both Nicaraguans and expats, who have decided to live without cars and have no problem doing so whatsoever. And the ability to get around and do things is incredible for those who are forced to do so. For those of us who have cars, there tends to be always some form of public transportation that we haven't learned how to use. And so we're like, oh, I don't know how to do this piece, I'll just take a car. But for those who have to, they take the time, they learn those things once, and then for the rest of the time that they're here, it's so easy. And a good example is the city bus comes here, and Camille knows how to take it into Leon, no problem whatsoever. It's like, I don't know, 20 cents, and it takes you into downtown Leon, and it stops right in front of my house. So it's so easy to just walk out, grab the bus, and you're in the city. I've never done it because I can walk to the city not that far, and I can drive pretty easily, so I always do one or the other, and I never bother doing the bus, so I actually don't know how to do it. I need to film that sometime soon, learn how to do it, because I will do it all the time, and it'll be super handy. Every time I learn a new thing, I do it a lot. But it is great having that option, and coming from a place where public transportation was really not an option or safe, having it be cheap, safe, and pretty easy has been amazing. So I certainly love it. And for those who are looking for a carless lifestyle but don't want to have to live in a big city in order to do so, right? Oh, well, if you move to Rome or London, of course you can live without a car. You probably should. But if you're moving to a small rural country, the idea that you could live without a car often strikes people as an amazing fact. You mean, how could I possibly live without a car? It's so big and open space. And yes, there will be limitations not having a car, but you also have the option of renting or buying one in the future if that's what you want to do. You can go without a car for a while and say, you know what, change my mind. Now that I've been here for a while, I do want to drive. Great, go get a car then. But if you want that option, here you have it, and it really is quite effective. Barbara De La Fuente says, Scott and girls, how about giving us some information about homeschooling, how it works for you and your family? I have 100 questions and would love to invite the girls to respond also. They're kind of camera shy. It's really hard to get them on the show. I will try to do that at some point, but not today. What is good, worth doing, enjoyable, hard, and the opposite of those words? Thank you all for your wonderful channel. I read every word every day. Awesome, thank you. So we homeschool, and we have done so from the very beginning. We knew when our kids were born that we were going to be living abroad at least a significant portion of their lives. And so we planned from the beginning to do homeschool. It also allowed us to live in parts of the U.S. with bad education systems, so we were never worried about paying extra to be in a district where they would have a better public education. That's a big thing in the U.S. You really have to be aware of your districts because education is very hot and cold even within the same city. And by homeschooling, they gave us a lot more control to make sure that they were definitely getting foreign language education, that they were definitely getting a balanced education, that they were able to customize what they were doing for exactly what they were interested in and so forth, and allow us to live in other countries and get a much broader education than they would ever get living in the same place all their lives. So we have always planned for that. It has been built in since day one. And so for us, it is simply how school works. So there isn't any adjustment. There's no learning curve, anything like that. I think overall it's worked fantastically. We can't even begin to imagine a life where we didn't do that. It's been over their lifespans so great that they are home with us all the time. They get flexible hours. There's so many studies on education about how flexible time and more time at home and more creative time and less classroom time, all those things contribute to education. Basically everything that traditional school does is by the book, what you would never do if education was your goal. You would never sit in a classroom. You'd never have the structured hours. You'd never do the way that they do classes. They wouldn't even learn the material that they're learning, right? Half the material that they're learning is impractical and stuff that will never be retained and is useless. And if you talk to adults, right, who have been through normal high school and you know anything from high school, if you question them, they act like they've never heard of it before, right? So all those things are obviously not needed, right? Do you need to know that the Spanish Armada was defeated in 1588? No, you don't need to know that. It would be good to have it in context, but instead of teaching it in context and giving something that you can use, they teach a date that you can't use, and an event that you don't understand, and words you may not even know. And at the end, who was the Spanish Armada? What's an armada? Why was 1588 important? And the fact that they were defeated or won a battle is meaningless to most people. And yet this is the kind of fact that they prioritize in normal school because it's easy to test on, whereas testing what is the relevance of the defeat of the Spanish Armada to the modern era of European rule is something that's very hard to test on, but actually potentially useful, at least potentially interesting. So we're able to focus on learning things that are actually important, things that are fun, things that will actually help them be better rounded adults, and that hopefully they retain. All of that's been great. For us, we spent the first many years, because remember that my kids are a bit older now, for those who don't know, 12 and 14, that they did a lot more with my wife, and both my wife and I have some backgrounds in education. We're not per se educators, but we do have a bit of background. We have worked in schools. We have both taught different things. So we have some background prior to that, and we have a lot of family who's in education, and because of the states and stuff that we're from, we have a lot of educational resources we can draw on if we need to. So in the early years, my wife did a lot of the hands-on, like kind of acting as a teacher, but both of my kids are very much independent learners. They both like really flexible schedules, and they prioritize that above other things. And so they both focus very heavily on self-education. They will do books, they will do videos, they like that a lot, and they will just sit down, watch videos, do online tests, and work through the material that way at their own pace, at their own time, which for Luciana is a little bit every day in the middle of the day, and for Liesel is a whole bunch on the weekends, on Saturdays, all bunched up together. They're very, very different learning styles, very different motivation styles, but that's who they are. And that freedom to be that is really good for them because it's teaching them to manage their own time. It's teaching them to explore breaking out of social norms and doing what's right for them rather than what seems right for some random adult who just randomly said, you should get up at a certain time and go to bed at a certain time, but then also said they were going to use daylight savings time, which broke whatever first thing they said is. And then you have to question the adults who would come up with that time matters and then that time doesn't matter all in the same breath. Yeah, there's a lot more of we're able to have them question things and say, is this true? Is this right? And be able to say, no, they're not able to back that up. They're repeating something false and teaching me something irrelevant. We're able to have those discussions. In school, often those things come with a lot of pressure and, hey, just don't rock the boat, learn something wrong and look the other way. And all we're teaching kids is that education doesn't have a purpose. We want to make sure education does have a purpose, and I think that that's coming through. And once in a while we say, look, here's the thing you don't need, skip it. right? Sometimes it's like, this is for students who are having struggles with this. You're not, move past. Don't let it bog you down. As long as you learn the material, good enough, right? We're able to have that flexibility. And because my kids are self-motivated, because they do want to learn things, because they are really interested in things, they do so much artwork and so much literature and so many different things that they would not be able to do if they were sitting in a classroom completely stuck staring at walls and taking notes for no reason. For those who don't know, note-taking is a known way to forget material. It's one of the things that they push in a lot of public schools because it creates the need for more studying, because it fills time. It's a very easy, so we don't encourage that stuff because pedagogy teaches us that those things are bad for learning. So we're not creating unnecessary steps to force them to forget things so that they can then go work harder to remember them. We just remember it right the first time. Make it interesting, make it true, make them pay attention. Done. Move on to the next thing. Learn more faster with less effort. That's really where you want to be with education, and I think that's working really well for them. I will try to do a show with them and get them to talk about it a bit, although because they never went to any other school, I don't know how interesting their commentary on it will be, other than we're glad we do this and we're glad we're in a safe environment, which obviously is really big for us as well. All of the places that we have lived or considered living recently within the United States within the last 15 years or so, all of them are places that have had mass shootings, either where we would have been or extremely close to where we would have been. There's no way that it would ever cross our minds to let our kids go into a U.S. public school system. Here, if they had the resources that made sense, we would of course be okay with it. The schools here are safe, but they are completely in Spanish and do not particularly have resources. Homeschooling gives us the best of all worlds, no matter where we are, all the flexibility, the best education, and the best ability to adapt to our kids specifically. All right, now here is a loaded question from Steve Jefferson. Great program. If I live in Nicaragua for good, how much money will I need monthly? How much is an affordable house cost? Cheers. Okay, loaded question because everyone lives differently, obviously, and these things are subject to change, and a lot of it is just opinion. But we'll do some episodes on budgets, and we'll try to put some things together to give you a decent idea. But the main question is, how much is a house going to cost? That's the hardest thing to estimate. I have this one hair right here. It's driving me crazy on my brim. All right, so on the low end, the lowest you are reasonably going to be paying for a house is about $200 per month, and that's going to be pretty low. Now, I say that, but we just looked at one, the pink house, in an episode a few days ago, well, probably 2 weeks ago, and that pink house, 2-bedroom, 1-bath, very small, 360 square feet, more like a little apartment that's an individual house, $150 per month. It would be $145, but it has a water tower for continuous pressure even when the city is without pressure. So that is the absolute low end of what you're likely to pay somewhere. Now, if you actually want to live in a completely remote Nicaraguan community, I have seen rents more like $95 a month in an individual house that is modern and recently built. Same thing, probably 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, basically the same place, just in a lower cost area. The one that we saw for $150 is right in the city of Leon. So, okay, maybe we could go down to $95. I have seen advertisements for $84, and of course, none of those are like shanty living, which obviously I wouldn't recommend. But for most of my viewers, you're going to be looking at $200 plus, although people have expressed an interest quite a bit in the $150 house. So if that's something you're interested in, let me know and we'll go talk to people. But $200 on the low end and $500, maybe $550 on the high end. That's kind of your range for what you're going to pay for most of my viewers for a rental. Now, if you're looking at, really nice beach places, of course, you could potentially pay quite a bit more if you're looking at San Juan del Sur and you want to be in, one of the up on the hill places with the unbelievable ocean views and huge, 10,000 square foot luxury living, everything's marble and blah, blah, blah. That's going to be costly and it's going to be more or less. I mean, you'll be cheaper than in the U.S., but you're not going to be a lot cheaper than in the U.S. You just can't be. The materials are the same. But for the things that I tend to show on the show, the things that you see here, the cost is going to be in that range, and you can get very, very broad throughout the country with that, including in San Juan del Sur. So that's kind of your housing. And if you're worried about a budget, you're much more likely to be that. If you are coming down and you're like, I can spend $10,000 a month on rent, I don't care at all, you're not going to be asking me about your budget because you don't care. It doesn't matter what, you're just going to do what you're going to do, right? It doesn't matter. So within reason, figure $200 to $500, maybe $550. Now, you can, in that, edge that towards the higher end and get furnished, or edge it towards the lower end and get unfurnished. If you're really looking at coming down for no more than a year, definitely unfurnished. If you're coming down, furnished, don't buy furniture. If you're coming down and you think you're going to stay for a long time, consider buying furniture relatively quickly, because that's going to help you save money and make decisions, make things your own. Even if you're not going to stay in that spot, grabbing a moving company and going from place to place, not a big deal. You'll be able to do that without a problem. Food for the month. This is your biggest expense in all cases, right? What is the lowest you can spend per day? Reasonably, about $10. So that's a little bit over $300 per month that you have to survive. Could you live for less? Yes, if you really want to live like a Nicaraguan and you really want to limit your cuisine and give up on going out to restaurants and stuff, for sure, you can get below $10 a day. If you want to, go crazy and spend $100 a day and go out to eat and go to really nice restaurants and get lots of wine and never have to worry about anything, of course, $100 a day would cover absolutely anything. And if you want to pay for a lot of people, right, you can still go out and throw parties. You can go out like crazy amounts of stuff. Somewhere in the middle is where normal people are going to be. Typically, we're spending, $20 to $40 per day for food, but I'm also feeding a family, so it's difficult to gauge exactly where that's going to fall, and everybody eats differently. If you're just eating rice and beans and eggs, yeah, you can be eating for $1 to $2 a day. Remember, Nicaraguans have a monthly budget. Typically, a lot of the ones who are working class are looking at budgets of only about $200 a month, rent and everything included. So obviously, all of their food has to fit within that. Their clothing budget has to fit within that. So obviously, it's a struggle, but they're able to feed at $1 to $2 per day. And that's reasonable. Mostly rice, beans, and eggs. Of course, eggs in the U.S., you couldn't do an egg for $1 a day. Here, you absolutely can. They're pennies. That's a tough thing to gauge. But if you look at my prices of restaurants, you can kind of get a feel, and you have to estimate how many days of the week are you going to go out to eat, how many times you're going to cook at home for yourself, how many times you're just going to eat cheap street food, are you going to go to the markets, are you going to go to the grocery store? All those things are going to affect you. And if you're looking at a larger budget, you may want to have a cook, and that could reduce other things. So we have a cook, a full-time chef. You can hear her in the background. She does the shopping, which she did this morning, and by doing so, yes, her shopping budget is bigger, but she goes and saves money on things compared to me shopping because she goes to cheaper markets, she buys cheaper products, she can haggle for them, she knows what they should cost, all of that, and then she cooks them. And because she cooks here, that reduces the number of times that I'll go out to eat by a lot. And it is so inexpensive to hire someone, and groceries are so much cheaper than restaurants, that putting the two together, it's actually cheaper for me to have a chef than to deal without one, because I would be at restaurants more often, a lot more often. And so for me, because I'm feeding a family of 4 plus extra guests that are always at the house, and it's good to have someone who can stay and watch the kids when I'm not here or take care of the dogs when we're all gone. So many reasons. It's extremely cost effective to have a dedicated cook for us. Probably not for you, but very possibly it's a thing to consider depending on what your budget is and what your needs are and what you're looking for. And if all you want to eat is rice and beans, you like to cook for yourself, none of that applies. You can eat for 50 cents a day and cook for yourself, but if you need to have things prepared for you or whatever, you're going to have to adjust for that. So it's a really tough one, but the range is huge. But at $100 a day, like, you could eat anywhere, take people out to eat, drink any amount of wine. Like, you're never going to touch $100 per day. The most expensive meal I believe I've paid for in the country on a per person basis was roughly $40. That was an extremely high end, very prefixed dinner with wine, while you waited for food, wine while you were having dinner, dessert, everything, multi-course meal at a very fancy Italian restaurant in the heart of the most expensive district of Managua. That's $40, right? So that gives you a feel. And when we go out for really fancy other places, we're looking at the teens into the 20s, not something crazy. And when we go out for just moderately fancy, we're looking at under $10. Again, per meal, it would not be outrageous to spend above $15 going out to a decent restaurant, even if you're being a little bit conservative, but getting anywhere towards 100 would be unthinkable. We went out to De Umo last night, and I believe it was $25 for 2 people to go out to eat, and that was with 2 meals and 2 drinks, everything included. After the tip, I think we were around about $12 per meal all in, so not expensive at all, but that's a decently fancy place here in town. And we didn't go crazy with the meal, but it gives you an idea of what you might pay. As far as other expenses, you need to think about cars and transportation. You need to think about power and all of that, and how you live really determines all of that. Power for us living in the country, below $100 a month. If you live in a small house, we have friends who did it. They got below $17 a month in a pretty big house in the suburbs. You could easily, as a single person, don't need air conditioning, you could end up with power approaching free, maybe $5 to $10 a month if you're being careful. And if you're not, you know, you're probably not going to spend a lot. We've never seen really big bills here, much lower than we see in the States. As far as internet, you can get really good internet or pretty decent, 100 meg with TV, with telephone, $39 or less. And you have multiple carriers for that stuff. Cell phone is very cheap. We normally look at about $15 a month is what we pay for really good service, and so forth. Water bill is so low that we don't even see it. It's probably below $20 a month, and we do quite a lot. When we lived in the city, we had to use a lot more. Here, we don't really need anything because we have a well, so it really becomes part of our power bill. And then any activities you're going to do, obviously you have to budget that on top. So you're going to have to think about what your entertainment budget is going to be. But typical entertainment here is very cheap. Like I said in a recent video, we went to the races up in the mountains, and that cost 90 cents for 2 people to get in. But we had to drive there, so there was gas and stuff. And of course, they expect you to buy tacos or quesillos or whatever while you're there. So you're going to want a budget of at least $5 for food, if not 10, right? And if you're going with people, of course, you have to budget for multiple people. So all those kinds of things, like so much stuff is cheap. Going out dancing is the cost of buying a beer or two. Going out for live music, again, the cost of a beer or two. Of course, you may want to combine dinner with those things. Add in what dinner is going to cost. But overall, entertainment tends to be extremely low cost here. So going out for a lot of things, even often, may not do much to increase your budget. And if you're combining your food or your alcohol budget with those activities going out, it may end up almost being a break even and you may not notice. If you live places where you walk, you won't need a taxi budget. If you take public transportation, you may not need a car. You have to balance all that, but for everybody, there really are options. So I don't know how useful that is to help you determine your budget, but if you want to write in with a bunch of details about your budget and your desired activities and how you want to live and all that, we can put together probably a pretty solid budget for you, and we'll do that on the show and break it down. Just an idea. All right, Kangaroo Crypto, I've just come across your channel. This is from 4 weeks ago, so like I talk to him all the time now. I've come across your channel, awesome content, filming, and info. Lots to digest and watch. Not sure if you've answered this already. What's the availability and average cost to rent a vehicle? Loving the looks of Nicaragua so far, more than Costa Rica or Panama. Absolutely. All right, so renting a car here in Nicaragua, honestly, this isn't the best answer. And one, I don't know the price. It's been a while since I've rented. When I did rent, I found it a little bit more pricey than renting in the United States. Roughly the same thing that I found in Panama. Whenever renting there, I was like, oh, that's actually like U.S. prices. And it kind of has to be because you're going to Hertz, you're going to Enterprise, you're going to all the same companies more or less, and getting the same cars and getting all the same insurance. But accidents are more common here. Not accidents that kill people, but accidents that cause damage to cars, right? You're much more likely to bump someone and cause some damage. You're much more likely to hit a rough road and cause some frame damage. So insurance for cars tends to be on the expensive side, even though the chances of you killing someone isn't actually that much higher. And just if you're wondering, in the United States, you tend to get one fatality out of, a fatality per 100,000 of a little over 12 per 100,000 people in the population is killed by a motor vehicle accident per year. And here in Nicaragua, it's a little over 15. That is a bit higher, but it is not out of line. And when you actually look at how people drive in the U.S., everyone has new cars and everybody has seatbelts and airbags and all this safety equipment. Everybody has that safety equipment. And there's all these things that go into making driving, cars distance from each other and everything else. In Nicaragua, there's very few controls. People are very close to each other. They're in very old cars. There's a cultural thing not to wear a seatbelt. A lot of cars don't have working airbags. That probably is not too many. And people are on motorcycle all the time with no helmets. 5 people on a motorcycle, little kids just dangling off the side. Things just mind-blowing how dangerous they are. Yet that should predict that it would be way more dangerous on the roads in Nicaragua. And the reality is it isn't, not from a fatality perspective. From a fender bender perspective, it's probably 100 times what the US is. I'm making that up, but it's not unreasonable, right? It's people bump things nonstop. That's just, it's tight. People are idiots. People will walk directly out in front of your car. There's no safety taken. There's no proactivity to not having an accident. And yet the fatality rates aren't that much different. Probably because Nicaraguans drive much, much slower in much smaller vehicles. That has a certain advantage. In the United States, they depend on much more control of the roads and having higher quality, newer vehicles with more safety measures. but the offset tends to work out pretty well. So can you rent a car? Yes, you absolutely can rent a car. Are they available? Yeah. Mostly those rentals are going to be in Managua and Granada, however, and I've seen quite a few in San Juan del Sur. Those places tend to be big on that. Now, of course, Ometepe is a different animal. You can rent something there, but probably not a car because it's a little island and you don't need a car. You just need a way to get around. In the rest of the country, rentals are few and far between. I've never actually seen one in Leon, although in theory it can be done. I've certainly never seen one in Chinandega or Matagalpa or any place like that. So it isn't like in the US or in Canada where you can go to any small town, any medium-sized town, rent a car, take it to any other medium small town and drop it off. It isn't like that. You're going to have to choose where you're renting from, probably Managua or Granada, and then you're going to need to return that car back to that place. And that's about it. So you can do day trips, you can rent for a week or whatever, drive all over the country, but you need to bring it back. So probably you're going to want to rent by the airport or have a home base in Granada where you can take a shuttle back to the airport because it is so close that you can shuttle from Granada to the airport. And I've definitely seen like the DoubleTree that I stayed at recently by Hilton. They have car rental right in the lobby. So it's not hard. But you can't just take it and then go to Chinandega for the week, drop it off, and then get another rental a week later and go to another city, drop. You can't do that stuff. It's in theory, there's a one-way rental, but it's going to be round trips almost every time. Or if you're in San Juan del Sur, certainly you can rent down there and you would base out of there, probably because you're flying in and out of Liberia, or you're just doing some long distance thing to get back to Managua. You don't want to drive to San Juan del Sur because you're only driving around in southern Nicaragua. But that's pretty much what it's going to come down to. It is a bit limiting. It's unfortunate that rentals are as problematic as they are. However, public transportation, right? It's fantastic. You have a lot of options. Take a shuttle. And if you really think about it, a car. So there are advantages to cars. I don't want to downplay that at all. Of course, huge advantages to cars. But if you're putting 4 people in a car and it's costing you $100 a day, you're reasonably only going to go so many places. And you'll be able to take public transportation basically anywhere for less, including, in most cases, private shuttles. So let's say you're in San Juan del Sur and you want to go to Granada, and you have a rental car. Taking that and having to deal with the gas and having to deal with the driving and having to deal with the insurance and all those things is going to cost you a certain amount, both in mental energy and in physical money. Public transportation to do that, you could do for just a couple dollars, even with a number of people. And if you wanted to do something in between, where you're taking like the Ashimche private shuttles, which run that route every day, I believe they're only about $15 per person. So if you had 4 people that would fit in a car reasonably, that would be $60. And you don't have to deal with the gas, you don't have to deal with the driving, you don't have to deal with the directions, you don't have to deal with a map, you don't have to deal with anything. You get to sit back, relax, watch Nicaragua go by out the window, ask questions of your driver, and have them take you directly to your destination, and you don't have to worry about parking or anything. In most cases, that's going to be better. There are exceptions. If you're the type of person, like me, who wants to stop along the road, I see a mirador, I want to pull over. I see a restaurant that looks interesting, I want to pull over. Well, they're not going to do that. If you need a bathroom, they'll pull over for that. If you have an emergency, they'll pull over for that. But they're not going to pull over just because you want to look at the mirador. Maybe they will, but probably not. If you're the only one on it, you might be able to convince them. And so you save quite a bit of money. And if you need to then take a taxi at your destination, you have quite a bit of money to do that. The chances that you're going to come close to what you would spend on a rental is unlikely, especially if you have a day where you're staying somewhere. If you have a rental, you got to pay for it for that day when it sits idle. If you're staying somewhere and you're taking public transportation, that day is free. And so that generally works out better. Again, it all depends on how you want to travel and what it is you want to do. If you're house hunting and you need to go from remote location to remote location in really awkward ways and you need to be like not plan anything, and okay, that's when car rentals really tend to work out. But if you're, and if you have a number of people, like really cramming them in, if you can get 6 people in a vehicle, well, it starts to get a lot better. But if you're only 2 people, 3 people, public transportation is going to have so many advantages. So things to consider. But yes, you can rent. No, it's not super cheap like you might expect. But if you think about it, Nicaragua being a cheap place really has very little effect on the cost of a vehicle. All right, our last question for the day comes from Yemi Okua. I hope I pronounced that right, but there's very little chance that I did. Also a month ago. Hey, Scott, I'd like to know what other options are available in Nicaragua, especially in Matagalpa region, for hot water. If you had to renovate an existing house or build a new one, are hot water tanks like you'd find in North America sold in the hardware stores? Is there a way to get around having to use the suicide showers? So this is pretty straightforward. The answer is yes. If you're renovating or building, you can put in anything you want. And are hot water heaters available? Yeah, for sure. Are they common? No, not at all. Like, you're never going to find a house that has one. Never expect to do it. But do they exist physically in the country? Yes, you can absolutely get them. It's not like they actually don't exist. It's just that they practically don't exist. If you are renovating a house, however, you're going to find it to be incredibly expensive to change the plumbing, to put in something different. Just be aware that modifying plumbing in houses built from concrete is extremely difficult and expensive. Can you do it? Yes, you can do almost anything you want when renovating. Is it going to make sense in your vision of Nicaraguan living and renovations? Probably not. There's a reason why people don't do it. What you would reasonably want to do is one of four things. There's five real options, right? Let's just run through them. One is live with cold water. Managua's not that cold for its water supply. It's not like Matagalpa. If you want to be a Matagalpa, you better rethink having no water heater, because you will be sorry. But Managua, it's fine. I've never once showered in Managua and said, oh no, it's cold. I just said, I was hoping for it to be hot, right? It's different. Here in Leon, I have a suicide shower. My one works all the time. My one works part of the time. When it doesn't work, very rarely do I take the effort of moving to the one that does work. That's how little I care. I like that it's an option. My kids use the ones that are hot. I mostly use the cold one because it's not that cold, and it's colder than it is in Managua. I have no idea why it's colder than Managua, but it is. The beach is colder still. But Matagalpa, Jinotega, those places, you will get frostbite in the shower. Don't do that. Find a way to warm it up. All right, so that's your first option, is just living with it, which really isn't as bad as it sounds, but trust me, I wouldn't. Second is just get a suicide shower. They really do work. They're cheap. It's effective. It's what people expect. No one's going to think that's weird. Even really nice houses, that's what they use. Third option, passive solar. That means you put a black plastic tank or similar on your roof. You run a little extra plumbing and you have it go somewhere in your house, probably directly over your bathroom, have it go into the shower and just use the pressure coming from that and fill it up from whatever pump you're using, Baba, and there you go. That can work, and with relatively minimal plumbing, assuming you're able to put a tank more or less above your shower. That is pretty cheap, would not be hard for someone to maintain, and you can certainly do that here. That is not unlike what they do in a lot of Europe. Mediterranean Europe, where I used to live, Italy, Greece, Spain, that is the main thing that they do. Like Nicaragua, they get lots of sunlight, but they're not as warm, so having warm water showers matters a lot. But they also tend to have expensive new construction in many places, so they have those big passive solar tanks on the roof plumbed into an entire hot water system in the house, not just going to a single shower. That makes that pretty attractive. Here in Nicaragua, it makes it a lot less attractive because you're only going to use it in one spot, but it is cheap and we get an awful lot of sun. It will probably work wonders for you if you only need to heat 1 or 2 showers. But I'd recommend heating all through the house if you can, but it's very difficult. Fourth option is, yes, tear everything out, get a hot water tank like we use in North America, and either build new and plan for it, in which case no problem at all. If you're gutting a place and modifying for it, that's going to be super expensive, and I can't imagine it being worth it, but it does exist as an option. The fifth option is probably what's going to make sense. This is what modern places in Europe that do not have space to do, or an option of doing a rooftop passive solar, is doing on-demand inline heaters, and these are not hard to put in, and basically they're like the high end of a suicide shower. Suicide showers are dangerous and crazy because they move electric all the way to where the water is coming out and have it kind of come into contact with you and everything, and they're like $30, right? So like it's kind of like the 5 and dime version of a hot water tank. It's not the place where you want to skimp that much, and yet we all do. What passive heaters are going to do, and lots of places in the US do this, but they're mostly seen as an upgrade and specialty, and in Europe they're really common, is it goes, for example, underneath your sink in the kitchen. You have the hot water, you have one water line that runs to under the sink, then it splits into cold and hot, and it heats the hot right there on demand. It can be gas, it can be electric. You turn on the sink and it fires up, and in a few seconds you have hot water. As hot as you want, as much as you want. It actually works really, really well. In many cases, it's more efficient than the big tanks we used to have. So it's well worth considering from that perspective. You do the same thing throughout your house. Often you put it either just to the side of the shower, or if you can get into the wall, you put it into the wall behind the shower, and it heats the water in the wall. In the US, we have, gypsum board walls, and it makes it really easy to hide it in the wall. Here, we tend to have concrete, so you're probably going to want to put it in the ceiling or something. talk to a plumber, get someone in to look at it, but you do have the option of putting those around the house. If I was going to own a house, instead of just adding suicide showers to places where I feel that it's too cold, I would certainly do inline, add them to the places that make sense, especially the kitchen, because it helps you clean the dishes. It's just good for sanitation in general. And very low cost. They only use electric or gas when you're using them. They don't use it the rest of the time. A hot water tank has to use some all the time. They're pretty efficient, but they're not anywhere near as efficient as an inline. Plus, you have to pump it around the building, in which case, especially in the US, like it cools down as it goes through the walls. Here, it would be hot. You don't have to get it nearly as hot because it's only going a few inches, and you have much more control. That's what I would actually do. If you're really looking, long before you replumb anything, long before you make a huge, crazy investment, either do passive if you can, or if you can't, do the inlines, or maybe do both, right? Yes, avoid the suicide showers if they worry you or you're looking for something better, but they're not as bad as they seem. They're pretty bad. And you do have options. And if you do want the hot water heater for whatever reason, yes, that is a potential option, just probably not going to be what makes sense. In general, look at what other people do, follow their designs. You can look at what expensive places do, cheap places do, but looking at Nicaraguan designs instead of North American designs, there's going to be a good answer for almost anything. You just have to figure out how Nicaraguans would tackle this in a good way versus how would North Americans tackle this in a good way, and then trying to adapt it to potentially different construction, different available products, different plumbing, different approaches, different weather, and all that stuff. Thanks for joining me. Please remember to like and subscribe. Ask your questions. Well, first, buy me a coffee with the link up here, then get down there and ask more questions so that we can have more episodes like this to talk about things and get your name mentioned on the show, because that's fun, right? Cool. And even if you don't have a question to ask, get down and say hi, say you like the episode, you don't like the episode, give some opinion, get involved. Love all the conversation. As always, post on social media, tell your friends about the show. If you're looking for direct help, info@relocatenicaragua.com, and I will see all of you tomorrow.